Hello and welcome everyone. This is 5 security mistakes in data modeling. Are you guilty? So we have Karen Lopez. She is a senior project manager and data architect with deep expertise in development and processes and information management. As the data evangelist for Info Advisors, she brings a practical and approachable style to her sessions, making complex topics easier to understand and apply. With over 20 years of experience as a speaker, Karen is passionate about helping audiences gain real-world insights and be inspired in new technologies and methods. She is also a proud space enthusiast and a champion of team data. So we're excited to have you join again. And as the presentation starts, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the questions panel and we'll be answering them throughout or at the end of the presentation. So with that, I give you Karen.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm a space enthusiast. I don't even know if I have any space stories in this one, but I usually try to put them in. I want to thank you all for joining us today on a Thursday because I love talking about data. And over the last couple of years, I've been really happy talking about security, privacy, and compliance issues. So when I was asked to do this, this is like, okay, this is my vibe. This is what I want to do. Let's go through. So that's me. I will mention that I'm a Microsoft MVP, and that's not important here, except to say that because I'm immersed in that technical space, I tend to use terminology and refer to features in sort of the Microsoft way. I have some other data platform things that I can talk about, and I will, but that's just to say, hey, I'm not here to sell you anything about Microsoft. It's just, that's the world I live in. So, as Melissa said, please put your questions and comments right into the questions area. Don't hold them until the end, just ask them, and I'll try to keep my eye on what those are to see if I can answer them along the way too. So why this topic, besides the fact that I really love data, is that I think we all should love our data. And when I say our data, I mean the ones, our own personal data, as well as the data we steward, we curate, we collect, we archive. It's important that if we have a passion for our data, we'd want to secure and protect it. My goal for this presentation is to raise awareness of some features, some things you ought to be worrying about and concerned about, some best practices. I don't like the term best practices so much, but I just want to say a lot of these I consider now minimal practices, and I'll talk about that why. And then I have a few calls to action. So make sure that you're not just left with me talking about security. When I think about this topic, especially related to data modeling, I really see two giant categories of what I would talk about. One is how do we support the protection of data with our modeling efforts, as well as how do we secure our modeling assets, because they are both attack surfaces if they're not managed as well either. So today I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about why this is important. I'm going to go through about 5 mistakes that I've picked for the time slot, and then I'm going to go through some bonus mistakes because, you know, there should be a bonus. And then it says Q&A, but please put your Q&A all the way through as we go. One of the reasons I got drawn into this concept of focusing more on security, privacy, and compliance is because privacy legislation has put a greater emphasis on data protection, data breaches, ransomware. I don't know about you guys, but ransomware keeps me up at night. And I have some stories to tell about that. And then to go with all this, there's been much more legislation around privacy and security and compliance that has some really specific penalties. And in some cases, criminal penalties are possible. And I know, I like to say that we all know what ROI means, right? Return on investment. But in 2025, you need to know that ROI also stands for risk of incarceration. And that means for the most egregious cases of data breaches and unprotected data, There could be people going to jail and prison because they didn't even do the minimum professional level of conduct when it comes to protecting data. And I'm sure you've all heard stories, not at your current company, but of your half-aunt, step-sister-in-law's dog groomer's beautician where the data wasn't being protected. And I love sharing those stories outside this webinar. The other thing that's come up, especially recently, is this call to focus more lately on artificial intelligence and data and how they interact. So this is becoming more and more prevalent, from preparing and protecting data through the AI process, as well as using AI to help us protect and govern the data. So again, two major categories when I talk about these things. I've been playing with, in major tool sets, the use of AI in helping us with data quality, doing data profiling, checking my data, helping me even brainstorm things that might be about an entity. And also, my biggest use lately for my AI assistants has been helping me find sources of things. And this is one of the predictors I have. And I didn't set out to do this intentionally, but I believe we'll be using Copilots and Gemini and ChatGPT probably more and more over search. And like I said, I didn't start out doing that, but I found that, we're all kind of overwhelmed with the 10,000 pages of search results. But when I ask an agent to go find things, in general, it's pretty good about finding authoritarian sources that I trust, or helping me identify ones that probably aren't that trustable. So overall, while I still go to Google or Bing to do a search when I'm looking for something like a standard or anything, I'm finding more and more I'll just flip over to my agent, which I already have open or is already on my phone, to ask the question. And one of the key benefits of that is that I don't have to craft this algorithm of search terms and operators in order to get what I want. When I tell Copilot, in my case, find me if there are any international standards for data masking, seems to do a lot better job than if I just do a search. But I'm going to say, this is my usual rant here, we in the data management, data modeling profession aren't as good as other parts of the business or IT in putting our knowledge outside of a paywall and in public. So whereas when I have a problem with SQL Server or Oracle or Databricks, I can usually get really good references and standards and recommendations. But because we as a profession, for some reason, are kind of reluctant to do that, it's not as popular in our community. That means the results that AI is being trained on and the knowledge, I'll put that in quotes, that it knows, is really skewed towards content produced by non-data management professionals. And part of that, it's fair. In most organizations I've worked, we could not take our enterprise data models and put them out on the internet. I get that. Just like in a lot of organizations, a DBA can't put their database on the internet. A developer can't put all their code in public. But other communities tend to write and produce content. So I'd like to encourage all of you to figure out a way. You don't have to have a blog. You could just be on social media. You could answer questions on a forum. My favorite is to answer questions that are really data modeling or database design questions, because I get to put my influence out there. So that also means that this call to action for you to start thinking about how you would use AI in data modeling and how AI can be supported in data modeling is that it's almost unethical out there that that the agents are giving answers. They should know that they're not getting a lot of content from the major data modeling experts in the world. Okay, that rant's over. So some real world examples. This is the kind of stuff that keeps me up. So Uber had a token leak, Target point of sale man in the middle attack that made the news quite a while ago. LexisNexis, MGM ransomware, that one impacted me because I've stayed at MGM properties quite a bit. That also, they were down for quite a long time. There was Capital One that misconfigured a storage bucket on AWS. Cambridge Analytical was less of a technical glitch and more of a trust and confidence problem. The Marriott Starwood breach, that also impacted me because I'm a frequent stayer at both of those banners and all of their sub banners. T-Mobile had an API breach, and of course a really newsworthy one of SolarWinds supply chain attack. So I pulled together, these are rough estimates of each of these breaches, what the industry is estimating their losses were, and then what those losses might have included. And you can see a lot of them: legal fees, customer compensation and regulatory fines, operational disruption, reputation damage is listed in all of them. But I kind of wonder how many companies actually worry about that anymore, because they are, thinking it's going to happen to everyone, which is probably true. It's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. But the big ones are stock price drops. There are lots of breach and ransomware stories of whole businesses that went under. There was a college that had been around for 100 years that went under, that had to close because they couldn't resume operations of their educational institution. It's these kind of stories that I make sure that I'm up to speed on some of the cost, benefit, and risk of these things. When I talk to executives and management about needing more help or more resources or more licenses to keep the company safe, I'm going to tell them I'm doing it all for your personal ROI. Why should we worry about security? I cannot tell you how many times a developer, a DBA, a project manager, an application director, a CIO has told me, don't worry about it, our security teams do it. And that's a kind of ignorance. I don't mean stupid. I mean not knowing that most security teams, while they are responsible for security, they do not reach down into a table or into a file to figure out which data in that table and file needs to be protected, how it needs to be protected, and what features should be used to do it. Often the security team is brought in, at the beginning to make sure we have a great security plan, at the end to see if we did all the things in the plan. But it's, I believe, up to us as data management professionals and data governance professionals to actually take the lead of protecting the data, because we're the ones that love it the most. I mean, I know all of you print out your data models and take them home and put them on your fridge so that your family and friends can be proud of what you've done. And I think you should, by the way. So let's go right in to my first type of mistakes, is overlooking security features that are built into databases and data stores and into our data modeling tools. So here's some of them, or here's the reason. I believe, and I've said this for decades, the best way to protect our data is to put those security constraints and access controls as close as possible to the data as we can. So gone are the days where we let the developers build this all into the application, and here's why. We know that data isn't always accessed through an application or one application. So if developers are putting it into an application, the dashboard and analytics people are putting the security into their program, the self-serve BI people are trying to do that as themselves. We're building views on top of views to try to protect this. It's a huge technical debt. It's impossible to coordinate. And it also means we don't keep track. If we don't do these in the data model, we're not keeping track in a centralized place in our #1 repository of knowledge about those pieces of data, what its security needs are. So we are in the best position to manage this type of metadata and the business parts coming together for design. We can let DBAs and devs, and if you're a DBA and dev, good, because sometimes I'm an accidental DBA. It's been a long time since I could be an accidental dev, but I'm an accidental DBA. They can manage the implementation of it, but there's still a logical requirement that needs to be captured. So some of the examples that I know of, there's row level security. That's in a lot of different database tools. Column level security, that means access controls and how we protect a column of data. There's data masking, which typically is done on a column level as well. There's end-to-end encryption. Now, this one isn't really something that we would do the specifications for, except for the fact we are in the best position to determine what columns should have this extra encryption so that the data is protected not just at rest, but in transit and as it flows throughout the system. There's new features in Oracle and DB2 and SQL Server. They're basically blockchain or ledger tables. These are special types of tables where the changes are tracked and the changes are put in immutable storage that can't be changed so that someone can't come in and mess with the data. We call it making it tamper evident. And then the way we do permissions has really changed, especially with role-based access controls, server level rows, table level or database level roles. All of those things have changed probably since the last time you looked at it. There are features like change data capture or data change logs. These are automated ways. We used to have to build these on our own, but these are automated ways to keep for the database engine to keep track of all the changes, who did it, where it was done, and also do it in a way that protects those change logs. There's auditing that can do the same thing. There's data classifications we'll talk about. There's database vaults. These are new. I know about these in a few DBMSs and cloud providers. These are basically ways of protecting the data. And this isn't data vault, by the way, as a data modeling thing. There's attribute level access and label-based access. And the labels are kind of the tags from data classifications. So data masking. I went and looked at one of the examples of masks that we can do in ER Studio. So I have a table that has an attribute and a column named national ID number, and you can see it has all the normal metadata about it. It's what type it is, does it allow nulls? But you can see in this particular example, it's a Databricks example, that Databricks implements their data masking via a function, a specialized mask function. I wish we had more time to go into this more, but here's an example of DDL that Databricks uses to set up these functions that use masks. And then when someone goes to do the select statement, they can see that they can just apply it in their design of their tables. So you can see the CFP max in the middle of the page. CFP is, I believe, a Brazilian sort of national ID number. And you can also see about masking is there's often the ability for some people to see the unmasked data and some people to see the masked data. And in this case, the people who aren't group owners, in the group owners, when they do a query of CPF, they'll just get back asterisks. You can also see one there at the bottom. It used Social Security number. And in that particular function, unless you're a member of the Human Resource Department, you'll just see asterisks with underscores around it. In the past, data masking has been left up to the application teams, and we still suffer that same problem. We should be able to define it as data pros in one place, and then either implement it in the database, which is ideal, or have the developers use these functions so that they aren't inventing their own. Because the other thing we should be experts in is what is the legal or the required mask. So for instance, credit card number. Most of us should know, the world should know, but most of us should know the only valid way to mask a credit card number is to mask all the digits, all the characters, except for the last four. The last four are the safest ones to disclose. So some other database services that may or may not impact our job is now there's a lot of built-in tools that does threat protection, that tracks for SQL injection. There's a lot of monitoring and alerting both for the database, and there's some things that you can set up in the ER Studio suite of tools to do some monitoring, alerting of changes. There are vulnerability assessments. I think these are beautiful tools, sometimes built into your database tools, like SQL Server has these, but vulnerability assessments will say, hey, This looks like a social security number. You aren't encrypting it. You aren't putting a mask in it. You haven't classified it as a credit card number. There's no reason we should be doing vulnerability assessments purely by human code review. Then there's this new concept of clean rooms. Clean rooms are not like the Q&A clean rooms that I used to know about. These are specialized environments meant for sharing data with outside parties in a way that the outside party is physically and logically restricted to just seeing or interacting with their data, or not or just reading the data. And that is another layer of data access. There's tokenized sharing, which works kind of the same way. And confidential computing is used mostly for storage for things that cannot be changed. Logs, audits, certain records that aren't supposed to be changed, like sensor readings, or maybe accounts, because if you're using generally accepted accounting practices, you never change anything, you create an offsetting transaction. So another thing, the second mistake is not knowing where your data is, because we can't manage what we don't know about. Our first step for this, as we all know, as data modelers, is that reverse engineering is a great way to find out what's in a database. And since the beginning, ER Studio's had a way of reverse engineering a database, and in ER Studio, we have a very fine-grained level of what we're going to include in our reverse engineering. I know sometimes when I do a reverse engineer, I'm not reverse engineering the triggers or the stored procedures or functions or procs, just because I'm focused on tables, entities, and views. And then I can choose which of the objects that are in a database that I want to reverse engineer. And then there's compare and merge. I live and die by compare and merge, which shows me at the lowest granularity of data, what's the difference between my model and this database, or what's the difference between this database and that database, or this model and that model. This type of thing, a lot of people think they can do on their own with change control reports, change requests. I'm telling you, because of the way things trickle through a model, when you make a change in one place, you can't humanly possible keep track of this or even review it and see it on your own. And in this particular example, I'm seeing a difference in database user accounts of service attendant, what the grants are, sometimes the definitions, what the external name is. That's one particular thing. I'm betting a lot of us working with data models aren't reverse engineering this type of data. Even if we're not responsible for setting it, I believe it should be stored in the model so we can also keep track of which group has which rights to which data. So finding all that data, it's always in the last place you look until it isn't. So there's lots of ways that we can do inventorying of data. We just go looking for it. We can ask people, what databases did your application use? Maybe there's, a centralized database that the application director used where he knows all that or she knows all that. But we know human manual things just does not scale. People sometimes fib about it. We know that there are other ways that data is protected. So there's the ideal way in 2025 is continuous scanning of an environment. Where are databases? Where are file stores? Where are things going? Where are they moving? That's a whole other presentation. I have had to do manual scanning where I have a tool, but I'm not allowed to use it to be continuously scanning, and I have to run that scan. I don't like having to do it that way, but I can do it. And mostly I work my way into getting to continuous scanning. But the human reported, I get it. That might be all you have, but that's not good ROI. The other new data that is going to be harder to find is all the AI data and metadata. And by that, I mean the prompts. Who's taking care of securing the prompts? Who's taking security of the results? Or who's taking care of all the metadata? Do we even know with the AI that's being used in your organization, where is this data kept and how is it being protected? I bet you nobody knows. This is getting better, but a lot of times when I worked on a project, a lot of data in the cloud was not available for us to inventory, those of us in the data modeling group, because somehow that was someone else's responsibility. I don't think it is. And then finally, there's dark data, and I don't mean data on the dark web. This means that this is like the equivalent of that one kitchen door you have where just everything goes that doesn't have another place for it. This is data that's out there. In my experiences, it's usually in spreadsheets. It might be in Access databases. It might be, just in CSV files out there that we aren't protecting and managing. Now, that's a really big job description, but I think, again, as data management pros, we should be responsible for leading and getting this done, the identification and inventorying of all corporate data, as well as ensuring it's backed up and it's secure and tagged and classified. The other mistake is ignoring some data formats. So I say there's more than relational. So my bio says that I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I had to stop adding numbers to that because it's closer to 35 years that I've been doing that. So my initial work even predated relational. And so, but for most of my career, my data modeling was about relational data. I bet you that's true for a lot of you out there. If you think about all the other unstructured or semi-structured data that we are probably not responsible for, but it makes me call who is doing the governance of this data. So email messages. Okay, that probably, falls back to your exchange team or your infrastructure team. What about images? We no longer put images in databases anymore. So where are they being managed? How are they being classified? How are they being backed up? Same for video. And then charts. What I really mean here are reports and visualizations that are important to the business, but where is the configuration of them or the versioning of them being managed? Books could be a thing that are used in our enterprise data flows. Handwritten notes. I bet you everyone here thinks that handwritten notes are not within the scope of your work. I get it, but who's responsible for them? Who is the data management professional responsible for them? PowerPoints, records, audio, customer messages, social media, and maps. These are just examples. Where does this data come from? Well, it was born that way. It comes from machines, electronics, artists, content creators, physically comes from cameras and microphones, and it might be transformed from or into structured data, which is another reason why we should be managing it well. So some natural characteristics of this unstructured data. A lot of it is duplicated everywhere for performance reasons. So especially the media types, the digital and the image and the microphones and recordings and sensor data, that's duplicated. So I get it, but that just makes it even harder to manage and protect. There's usually tons of versions of them that may or may not be kept, that may or may not be managed well. It's harder for these unstructured data types to compare versions of them. Like I know there are tools out there where I can give it 2 videos and ask whatever's doing that to tell me what are the differences between these 2 videos. I don't have access to those. I certainly have it with databases because I can use ER Studio, but how are we going to know the differences between this type of data and the type of data we usually do? And because of all this, it's easier to exploit. So in my AI security presentations, I talk about all the way the images and audio is tampered with in a way that a human can't detect it, but machines certainly can. And that's usually done either to smuggle data from one place to another or impact ML models and AI outcomes in a way that would be very hard for a human to detect. It's often more costly, both in performance, time, and cost to query this type of data. So not having metadata about it means it's even costs more to find it. And in general, it's more difficult for humans to work with, mostly because the size of it, the complexity of it, and the fact that a lot of people don't know who do this, don't know how to access the metadata that's embedded in it. I'm going to take a second for some questions. Love reverse engineering, but some do not realize what is design, logical data model with relationships, constraints, key AKs and PKs, and what physically implemented can be different. So I have a thing in here about that, but I'm just going to say, this is what model-driven development should be, so that we're constantly comparing models to what's physically being built. But I agree. Let me see about some others. Oh. On this one, love data. Oh my gosh, you just broke my heart. I can say that data has been my passion. There's a photo that my mom has with me as a toddler lying on a sofa holding the phone book in front of me. Remember those, the big phone books? Pretending to read the data. Somehow I was born with this weird passion for structured data. That's probably too much information, but there you go. So let's talk about treating all data as equal. That's a mistake. So here's my number one rant. I do this in all my presentations. So we need to stop using production data as dev test data. Now, I know your company would never do that, because in most jurisdictions outside the US, that actually violates almost all privacy and compliance laws. And the reason is, if your production data has health data or personally identifiable data, I'm guessing that those people did not give consent to have their data used this way. But the second reason is that typically dev test environments are not as secure and protected and backed up as production. And therefore, a lot of the data breaches we read about are the open bucket problems, such as people putting a backup of a database or the test database in an S3 bucket in AWS and not locking it down, or putting the password for it in GitHub. It's not right to use production data as dev test data. And then the third important reason is your business and your customers and your objects of your business might not currently exist. A certain type or a certain case might not exist in your production data. So if you don't have truly designed test data, you don't even know if you're testing the right kinds of things. And I have another talk where I have all kinds of examples of that type of data. I'd love talking about this. But I get how hard it is to create tests and synthetic data, but I'm here to say that I believe as data professionals, we should be leading that charge, as well as something I do is I will generate, 10 to 15 rows for every table in my data model, so that I can put them into spreadsheets with a tab per table, so I can sort of demonstrate to the people who are implementing things from the model, what does this mean? What would this look like? And that has also helped them get started with test data without having to pull from production. So the big thing about treating all data equal mistake is that we need to classify data. And one of the types of classification, there's sensitive data, which is usually data that would be embarrassing to get out, or concerning, maybe is a better word. So like health data. Restricted could be data that we have about our company that's proprietary, that is our customer lists and everything. So it's restricted access. Confidential could be things like salary. It's things that not everyone in the company should need to have access to. There's personally identifiable information and personal health information. Those two things often enacted in legislation in most parts of the world. So we definitely have a legal and compliance expectation that we're classifying it. There could be regulated data. That might not have anything to do with who has access. It might just give everyone a heads up. Hey, this data is part of our regulatory obligation with our regulators, so don't go messing with it without approval. And then classified, I mean that in the traditional classified sense, like top secret. We do need to know what types of data, both rows and columns, and I'm going to talk in relational, even though this all applies to non-relational data, for classified data. And then it's important to explicitly say something is public data. So when I put together my classification tags and my masks, I default everything to unknown, so it stands out. And then someone has to physically go in and decide that this is publicly usable data. So an example, might not be true for all cases, is in retail. We have lots of data about stores, where it's located, does it have parking, what its physical address, what its mailing address is. Those kind of things could easily be public data. And then there are these ways of doing it. I always had to do it manually, which meant look at every table, every attribute, every column, everything, and put in a classification. We used to have to do this just in notes. That was hard. Then there are data classification tools that will look at your metadata, and I really mean your table and column names, because we know everyone has wonderfully beautiful table and column names. There's data profiling, which I'm much more excited about. It looks at your data. So if there's a 16-character all numeric field that starts with 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, you could make a good guess that that's probably a credit card number, at least enough for you to go find out if it's a credit card number. But profiling, I mean, profiling helps you do that. Profiling will also say, hey, it looks like we have IP addresses in our mailing addresses. That doesn't seem right. This is other ways of classifying your data. And then the newest things is pointing AI at it, which is kind of a combination of all of those to say, help me classify the data. So the important part of data classification is there's an analysis, there's recording the labels, and I believe the database is the data model and the database is the best place to do it because it's close as possible to that. Also, multiple labels can apply to the same data item, and in a lot of cases, people think only one does. But you can see it could be health information, and it could be confidential, and it could be sensitive, and it could be classified. These labels are then used in modern data systems to automate the protection. I have this feature set up in 365 that is data exfiltration, that's to stop me from sending out credit card numbers and social security numbers, sending it out on email. Well, guess what? All my test databases have that, and it gets flagged because the AI or the data exfiltration thing has said, hey, you're not supposed to do that. But it's my test data and it's totally made up. So I'm always happy when I see those notifications. So some tips, they can all have more than one. Privacy is not just GDPR. This is another rant of mine. Privacy laws exist almost everywhere in the world, and GDPR is no longer the toughest one, meaning there are new privacy laws and regulations that have even more requirements and constraints. Don't stop studying GDPR, but stop using it as the only thing you study. Languages and cultures are critical to classifying data. A lot of these tools support several languages. A lot of tools only support English, so that can be an issue. Public data requires to be classified that way. They can change over time. The data owner should assist in all this. And just because it's classified, we still might have to mask or encrypt it. So one of the examples in this table, you can see that I have these security objects at the bottom of the table. So PIPEDA PII, that's the Canadian law, privacy level, internal use only, security impact high. These are ones that I just made up. But then when you generate a report from the model, look, it's all over there in the report at the column level. So this gets set at the table or column level. I want to do it also at the column level. And in the past, I've written macros to go through collect all the privacy and security labels from the columns, determine which ones are the highest, and slap them on the table so that we know. And then another thing that's a big deal for me are what I call threat buckets. These are the S3 storage accounts, the Azure Blob Store, the Dropboxes, where people just put data there and they think it's secure because they think someone's taking care of that security, and they don't know that they've just put it like out on their front porch with a sign that says free sensitive data, come take it. But there are these other cases. address line 4. I have this great story of a client that was a retailer that used to put how late this vendor could tolerate being paid, a vendor being paid. And then the devs didn't want to go to the data modelers to go through all the process of getting it approved. So they just started throwing it in address line 4 because nobody uses address line 4. All great. They got away with it. Nobody knew about it until they changed their accounts payable system. And in the new system, with their new clear windows on their envelopes that got printed right on the checks, address line 4 was printed, and all these vendors got checks that said, you know, plus 90 days, plus 120 days, plus 7 days. And they could all figure out that this data had been stored in what I call a threat bucket. This also happens with health data and clinical notes. I often see credit card numbers in notes. I also see foreign addresses and contact info in notes because, say, a retailer says we only do business with people in the United States. But the 16-year-old clerk working there in a membership company is like, oh yeah, come on in, buy our stuff, rent our videos. Oh wait, that doesn't happen anymore. They'll just make up an address in the regular fields and stick the foreign address and phone numbers in the notes field, and off they go. And guess what? That's not protected. So compare and merge is something we do at the account level, and we can do these grants. Like I said, I'm not usually responsible for setting these, but I can reverse engineer them, and that makes me happy. This is the same one from before. You can see that my alter, my compare, this is the SQL it got generated to create the user service lead, and then this is the DDL that got generated to grant the specific action permissions onto all of those group accounts. I didn't have to write this DDL, AI didn't have to, ER Studio wrote it for me. So I talked about protecting data, our own models, like how do we protect it? So I've switched to the other major category. We need to control access to our data models. I can't tell you how many times I've been dropped into a new project and found out they just let everyone who had access to the data models, gave them full rights and said, you know, just don't screw it up. Don't worry, we have backups. I'm telling you, you don't want to do that. Remember, data models are production data for data modelers. Data models are production data for DBAs and devs as well. So we need to protect that access. We need to make sure models repositories are backed up and the models locally. I have been burnt so many times because someone put the repository on someone's desktop computer. We'd all been checking things in only to find out that wasn't backed up, and when the hard drive failed, it was all gone. We need to be testing restores of those, and we need to protect against both internal and external actors here. So the ways we can do it, the way we can do it with Team Server, which is the portal and the repository, definitely limit access for users. Don't use shared credentials. Now, I know in the past, it was very common for people to buy one user license and then share it amongst people so that they could buy fewer licenses. Now that doesn't work. And you're also putting yourself, if you use a shared credential anywhere in the world, you're accepting all the liability of anyone doing anything bad or mistaken who also has access to that credential. We should limit not just access to the models, but the actions they can take against it. We need to make sure that our team server and our repository is backed up and restores are tested, as well as all of our other data and DB tools. And then we should use in TeamViewer, there is a change management center that allows you to see, based on people completing tasks, checking them in, what it was tied to, what assignment it was it, and it can be linked to Jira and all this other stuff. And you can also see, as you go into the repository, who made changes to what. But a lot of people don't even know this functionality is out there, and you should be able to do that. Because I've had data modelers say, I didn't make that change. And I go to them and I'm like, here, you checked in this model at 11 p.m. last night, you made that change. So definitely securing the repository, something you can do right inside of ER Studio. And then Another thing to protecting data is, I believe we data management people should be using extended properties or user-defined properties and keep track of what are the requirements for retaining data, as this is becoming more and more important to regulation and compliance and security. The light way I do this is I record what's the retention period in days, or pick a unit of measure that works for you, what the cue or the action is. Like, should it be measured should this table have data removed from it based on the order date the data was created, the days since it was last accessed, and then what happens when that data meets that threshold? Should it be archived, deleted and destroyed, moved to another database? These are data lifecycle requirements that I believe we are responsible for. We can also use temporal or archival tables. That's usually a feature built into a database. And then there are third-party lifecycle tools you can use to do this. Oh gosh, I gotta keep going. So some bonus fails. Don't assume devs and DBAs are gonna take care of security, because they got other things to do too. Don't ignore securing data movement, especially through pipelines and ETL. Don't ignore data sovereignty. Data sovereignty is that thing like the data must stay in this country or this region. That is a type of classification or metadata about data. Again, don't use production data for dev test. And you should use model-driven development. Model-driven development is, and this happens on my projects, every change to a database starts in the model at the logical level. Then I compare merge the logical change into the physical, and then I compare merge the physical model into the data to the databases, and I generate the alter scripts and we do it. If you do that, you have a better data governance, less risk, and fewer issues with ROI, both definitions. So everything's coming at us now, from AI to regulation to keeping the value of our work in front of executives' minds. And the way we can build trust on there is by doing all of these things, which basically boil down to good governance. Some of the challenges we have are data literacy. We see that in the news recently, that a lot of people don't understand sort of the tricks and technical debt built into data and databases. We've seen it all, so we know exactly where their decision went wrong. We have a lot of data ethics issues recently with AI and marketing. Sometimes our tools aren't keeping up with this, and then the data processes change all the time, especially like if you throw in AI. So this quote has been attributed to Mark Twain. I couldn't find any sources that said it was legit, but I like it. Data's like garbage. You better know what you're going to do with it before you collect it. You should put that in your next stand-up meeting. And I want to bring this down to my mantra is every design decision must be based on cost, benefit, and risk. So executives and managers and project team leaders, they all want to talk about cost. I get it. But what about the benefit? The benefit could be for every dollar we spend classifying the data, we reduce our costs of this by this much, or every dollar we spend putting everything in a portal and in the repository saves us this much cost. And very few people actually put numbers or metrics to the risk. This is hard to do, but there are methods and frameworks for doing this. And I just constantly say, if we don't do this, you're going to have to appear before Congress or in court and tell the judge and the jury why you decided that encrypting the data impacted performance too much, so you didn't want to do it, yet you were putting the data in an open S3 bucket out there. So that's all I had for slides, and I'm going to go back and look through some questions. Thanks for the great information. I'm curious, would you think of data modeling as a function, as a part of data governance, data architecture, solution architecture, or something on its own? Or can it be any of these? So I believe I use the term data governance as the overarching umbrella of the profession of managing and loving data, I guess. That's how I use that term. Architecture comes under that. Data modeling is one part of an architecture, but it's also parts of other parts of data governance. So I think these are independent functions that usually have specialized skill sets and specialized roles, but they all fall under data governance in my mind. Yeah, yes, model-driven development, sadly gone out of favor a long time ago and hard to convince people to do that. I hear that, and I've heard it for the last 15 years or so. So my ability to demonstrate how this makes it easier, how it frees up DBAs from crafting and having to debug alter scripts and changes, how it frees up devs from having to maintain their own local databases for dev test. I've been able to make that case, but I have to prove it by making it easier for them. And one of the ways you do that is by having strong tools and skilled people to deal with it. But I hear you. Do you see the difference between data model and data contract? Yeah, data contract, the way I understand it, is not just a paper contract. It's going to be an implemented, automated way of sharing data between orgs or people or parties. And it says this data will be provided this often, in this format, in this file way, with this kind of metadata. And then computers will monitor that. And if the data gets sent that doesn't meet the contract requirements, it can be rejected. You can get an alert. It can cause a penalty to automatically apply to a contract. You can say, keep it on, but log this in JIRA that we need to go fix it. So I'm looking forward to the implementation of data contracts quite a way. I know there's one more. How do I scroll? Okay, that was a GoToMeeting one. I think I got all the, sorry about the cheeky question. Yeah, I love that. How are you leveraging Git and or GitHub in version control? Okay, so I've just started doing that with a lot of my tools. And I was usually under pressure not to implement the repository because I could use GitHub or some other version control thing. And the thing I had to point out to people is definitely I can send files there, I can send documentation there. But these other tools don't have the granularity to compare one data model to another or a data model to a database. Their tools are built to look at text as code or JSON or YAML or one of these other things. When ER Studio does a compare and merge, it's looking at how things are related, and it's also looking at the logical data and a lot of things that code comparing or file comparing doesn't do. So, and how named releases, gosh, it's been a long time since I've done that one. I use named releases. I version control and put release numbers on my data models and my master data. So I do that because I build a framework of this version of the application goes with this version of the master data, goes with this version of, I say data model, but to the other people, I say DDL, because that's how they think of physical models. And I maintain that relationship and help the application dev managers understand that you can't just say this data model is for, or the data model supports these applications. It doesn't. It's different named releases. So I use named releases kind of as like what they're designed for, a snapshot in time that I give a number to, that I publish as a deliverable, and it's separate from all the other things that people might do. Yeah, for data retention, are you creating new attachments or blend or that are binded to an entity and or table? That's how I'm using it. And then I also make sure that that information in the attachments goes into, and in my example in SQL Server, extended properties in the database. So again, that information is made available to the people working hands-on with the data. I hope, and we saw this with the security objects, I'm hoping over time that data modeling tools will start building in these things. I love attachments because it allows me to keep track of things that no one ever thought of that's important to us. But I like when things become proper objects, like the security and privacy objects became. That's because then I can separate them, I can standardize them, it's easier to explain to people. and they also standardizes it as well. Do you have any recommendations for small not-for-profits who don't have a budget for a data modeler exciting? What's the best way to address limited budget or skills? Yeah, that's a tough one. I work with a lot of not-for-profits and nonprofits that are in that same thing. One of the ways that this has worked in the past is there are often industry standard data models for certain industries. And a lot of time, those standard models, while an individual small organization might not implement the full breadth of it, it will get you, it's another type of data model pattern. The other is Lynn Silverstone's models, which are a type of data modeling pattern to get you started. It still has to be tailored and implemented and documented to the organization, but that's a good way of doing it. And I'm a chronic volunteer, but I believe data and IT systems should not be left up to volunteers because it doesn't scale, you get burnout, and there's not a good governance model there usually. It would be great if data modeling tools started incorporating data profiling, all three levels, and test data management. Yay, I'm absolutely applauding that. I agree. I want to see that. Gosh, I think we're almost at time. Let me see if there's any other questions. I think I got them all. If I
And
didn't,
thank you so much,
yeah,
Karen.
go ahead.
Yep, I was just going to say thank you so much and for getting to all the questions. So if there are any more as they come in, we'll make sure that we get answers out to them in our follow-up. Thank you. And then also, if you have any questions, you can scan the QR code here to reach one of our experts. We'll get back to you. And then just a note, I sent it out as an answer to a question, but yes, you will get a link to the recording at the end of this emailed out. It will also be available on erstudio.com within the next day. So thank you all.
Great. That's my AI me. And if you have questions, if you need help doing any of these things, I'd be happy to talk to you about it.